All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning. I would like to welcome you to our Small Caps Introduction webinar series. And it's part of the commitment to, raising awareness about small and medium cap shares on the JSE. And we'll be giving you an opportunity to engage with management at a variety of JSE-listed businesses. And this is the third company that I've had the pleasure to profile, which is a dual-listed energy business called Renergen, which has been identified as one of the most exciting listings in recent years. The company gives you access to a renewable play and a helium deposit in the Free State. And the CEO is actually with us, Renergen CEO Stefano Marani. He's going to be unpacking the investment case for the company. There will be a playback facility that will be made available for all delegates who are online, even those who may not necessarily be able to attend, but they did register for the webinar. And then we have the retail investors who will receive a sponsored voucher from the team at Easy Equities. And this webinar, of course, is brought to you by delegates, which is a financial problem-solving resource. And you can always follow them on social media, including LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And without much further ado, I'd like to welcome Stefano. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. And I really would like to extend a very big thank you to delegates, to Easy Equities, Mark, and Nastassia, and you are a marketing machine. I'm very, very impressed. Well done. And thank you to everyone for attending. I really do appreciate the opportunity. I think it's important that more people get involved in the small cap space in South Africa. That's one of the ways that we're really going to grow this economy. It's by putting money into the small caps. $1 million rand into a small cap employs a lot more people than $1 million rand into an ASPAS.
Yeah, you do have a point there. So what I'm going to do, Stefano, is that I'm going to give you the ability to share your screen, and so that you can give us some context, and the investors who are online and even the potential investors who have had their eye on your particular company will be able to get more information. So I'm going to do that right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
The floor is yours.
All righty. Let me just find the window. Did that work? No, hold on, sorry. Technical issues on my side. There we go. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Right. So this is the brief introduction into Renergen. We are an emerging natural gas and helium producer. I'm going to try and go as briefly as I can through this presentation. It's available on the web or either through delegates. I think what I'm going to try and do is keep it as open a format as possible and engage with everyone with their questions as much as possible. So in a nutshell, we were the country's first SPAC. We listed on the JSE in 2015. And the whole discussion around the SPAC is just a very, very different discussion for a different day. That was a terrible experience. But anyway, for better or for worse, we were the first SPAC. We then acquired the Virginia Gas project in November of 2015. And now we have a dual listing both on the JSE and on the ASX. We have 100% interest in Tetra 4, which is the Virginia Gas project. So Tetra 4 is the legal name of that entity. It is to date the first and only onshore petroleum production right. Now, this is actually saying something. In South Africa, we're aware of the MPRDA and the issues with surrounding the mineral and petroleum resources development bill. This has been a bill that's been in negotiation since 2012. We got our production right literally right before the moratorium was put out, and that means that we've got at least a 5 to 8 year first mover advantage over anyone else in South Africa that has ambitions of getting gas out of the ground. And this is the key differentiator for us, one of the key differentiators. The second major key differentiator is the concentration of helium. So this resource is unique in so many respects, and we'll take you through all of the uniqueness and the specific geology in the field as we go along. We started off with a pilot project following the cash raise from the listing. The little pilot project was to compress some gas and to run some buses to try and prove the concept to the South African logistics companies. That's been incredibly successful. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but basically the buses have done something like 3 million kilometers, and we've saved something like 3 million kilograms of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere as well. So that's been an incredibly successful trial. And now we're obviously moving into the next phase. So as of the 3rd of July, the capital structure, there were 117.5 million shares in issue. The share price was around $1.20 on the Australian exchange, about 14.50 Rand. It puts our market cap in Rand terms somewhere around 1.7 billion or about 140 million Aussie dollars. The only debt that we have on the balance sheet, there's an interest-free loan, which was part of the acquisition price. That's got a net present value of about 39 million Rand. But like I said, that's an interest-free loan. And then we've got the funding from the United States government.
Let's try that. Can you hear me now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Your volume is down. And how did we do this again? Bottom right-hand corner, eh? Oh, come on.
Have I done something wrong? Hello?
I don't think so. I can still see your presentation.
And can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, shall I wait a second or shall I carry on?
I think you can continue. I can still hear you, and it's still recording on my side.
So you must be there. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. So why would that be?
Okay, I'll carry on. Nastassia, if you can hear me, I'll just carry on.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm on a different call, Paula.
So we've got a facility from the United States government through their SOE, an entity called the OPIC, which is the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. They extended $40 million for this project, for the first phase of this project. We've got a range of shareholders, and notably on their, I think the biggest shareholder is Mazi Capital. They're sitting at about 22%. They're part of they basically sit across the financial institutions and the government-related entities. We've got the Otto family. The Otto family originally founded, they backed Nick and myself to go and buy this asset in 2013. So they gave us the money to make the acquisition and take the company off the seller's hands. So Nick and I sit in the management portfolio there at about 14.7%. And then the private and the smaller and the financial institutions are really as a result of the dual listings. Board, very well, very experienced board from the South African side. Notable members, our chairman is ex-CEO of Linda, which is the biggest gases company in the world. He was the CEO for the Asian time zone before moving to South Africa and becoming CEO of Afrox. He sits on our board as the chair. And then we've got David King, who is arguably Australia's most experienced oil and gas man. Dr. King has taken 2 oil and gas startups from zero and both of them listed or sold for over $1 billion. So David King comes with a wealth of exploration experience. Also proud to say that Fulu, our CFO, is the youngest CFO in the JSE. So that's a very, very good achievement for she's done an exceptionally good job in coming up the wings. So in a nutshell, the executive summary, we're a gas producer. We've got first mover advantage. It's the only exposure where you're going to get proven helium reserves or globally at this stage in a listed stock. Experienced management, we've got significant reserves, and our concentrations are unparalleled when it comes to helium. So taking you quickly through the resource, there's a whole bunch of numbers over here. If you're not well versed in oil and gas, don't worry. I'll try and give you a very quick crash course. Gas is either measured in BCF, which is billion cubic feet, or TCF, trillion cubic feet. Your P categories are your proven. That's what you have managed to prove to your reservoir engineer is not only underground, but is also commercially available for you to be able to extract and make a profit on. And then the P1, P2, the 1P, 2P, 3P is the level of probability that they assign with how much you're going to commercialize. If you take a look at these numbers on the methane side, 40 billion cubic feet is enough for us to run the first plant that we're busy building now for probably about 30, 35 years. So it's quite a formidable amount of gas. 284 BCF is a very, very large amount of gas. If you had to put that into context, Sasol uses about 1 trillion cubic feet every decade. So this would power all of Sasol's operations for probably about 3 or 4 years. So it's not an insignificant amount of gas. When you start to look at our contingent resources on the methane side, you add your P's to your C's. So if you've got your 284 and then you add 648, that's getting you very close to the trillion cubic feet of gas. Now your contingent resources, you've proven to the gas reservoir engineer that the gas is there, but you have yet to prove to him that you have a business case to be able to sell it. That's what your contingent resources are. And at 1 trillion cubic feet, like I said, that would be enough for Sasol for a decade. And then on the prospective resources, you'd add on an additional 2 TCF. 2 TCF, I mean, that's twice the size of Moss gas. So there's quite a bit of methane there. What's more important, though, is the helium. So on the helium side, 6.86 billion cubic feet of helium. That is enough for the entire consumption of the planet for 1 year. So it's a very big resource. On our contingent side, helium at 21 BCF, that would make it probably half of Canada's entire proven reserves. And then you've got on the prospective resources. So the prospective resources, you've shown the evidence that the gas has been generated, but you haven't proven that it's been trapped underground yet. 344 BCF, if you add then our contingent and our proven, that puts us on about 372 BCF. That would be the whole of North America. That would be the United States and Canada combined, and then you'd still have space to add on another country. And that is what we have in a very concentrated little area sitting in the Free State in our prospective resources. So it's quite a formidable amount of gas, of helium. All right, so now this is where it gets to the cool stuff. How did it all get here? Basically, the planet got struck by the largest asteroid ever to have hit the Earth. It struck in Vredefort. We're well aware of the Vredefort Dome. But if you had to think about what the geology looked like, about 3.8 billion years ago, the planet had one continent called Pangaea. And Pangaea was covered in, very, very early forms of life called cyanobacteria. The Earth then got pelted by a meteor shower about, call it 3 billion years ago, just over 3 billion years ago. And that meteor shower brought all of the gold and platinum and all of the precious metals to Earth. That bombardment is called the bombardment. It struck in a diagonal from the Free State and went all the way up into the DRC. And that's why all of the minerals are here. Then over a very long period of time, lots of rain caused soil erosion and all of these precious metals were washing into the sea. And it pretty much disappeared off most of the rest of the face of the Earth, except this asteroid, the Vredefort asteroid, struck in the middle of South Africa. And it created a huge crater. And as a result, all of the soil erosion that was moving away all of these heavy metals into the ocean caused all of these heavy metals to erode into the middle of the crater. And that's why we have the Wits Basin, which, if you think about it, the Wits Basin produced 90% of the entire planet's gold from 1905 to 2005, all in a little area in the Free State. It's still believed to hold 70% of the entire world's gold resources. And this is why we've got what we have. So you've got this fruit bowl looking like structure, which went and collected all of these heavy metals as a result of soil erosion, washing all of this stuff into this crater. And then slowly over time, layers started to develop over it. And You had early forms of life develop in the crater. That life was carbon-based. That formed some shales. As it began to fossilize, bacteria started to eat that. And lo and behold, 1.5 billion years after life having formed in the crater, you've got bacteria that are today living deep underground, eating this carbonaceous rock and excreting methane up to the surface. It's the only field of its kind where you drill for a fossil fuel, but it's not really a fossil fuel because the gas is being regenerated by bacteria. Just to try and explain this simply, if you drill for a normal gas reserve and you take the methane out, you can carbon date the methane and you can determine how old the methane is. Normally, that methane is between 100 and 500 million years old. Our gas, we carbon dated, and there's a large proportion of the gas that's less than 2 decades old. That means that as we drill, the gas comes out and the gas regenerates, and it continues to do so. So the first wells that we had were drilled in 1957, and they blow more gas today than they did in 1957. And that's just a sign of the regeneration. Normally a well would last about 15 years. So that's the biggest differentiating factor on the methane side. On the helium side, helium is a byproduct of radioactive decay. So you take uranium, you take thorium, you leave it there for a few billion years, and uranium turns into lead and it gives off 8 helium atoms. That's the basic nuclear physics behind it. What we have is that we've got this layer called the dominion, and then there's a layer called the Wits. And these have exceedingly high concentrations of radioactive metals in them. To put it in context, uranium is normally 3 to 5 grams per ton. In the Dominion, there are pockets where there are 10 kilograms. 10 kilograms, in other words, 10,000 grams per ton of uranium. And that is why our helium concentrations are completely unparalleled as well. So the methane seeps up through the Dominion group, fetches the helium in the Wits, it congregates in the Wits, and we drill really shallow wells into the Wits, open up preferential pathways, and the gas comes up to the surface. So why is helium special? It is literally an industrial gas without substitute. So you cannot manufacture an MRI and you cannot run an MRI machine without helium. You need it for the supercooling of the magnets, and there is no substitute. There are very specialist kinds of welding that you can't do without any other gas. The other category is pretty cool. That's Uncle Sam. No need to go much further into that. Laboratory, that's testing, that's CERN. CERN is probably the largest single user of helium on the planet. That's the particle accelerator in Switzerland. Lifting balloons, purging. You cannot manufacture fiber optics, and you cannot manufacture electronics, sophisticated electronics, without helium. So this webinar would not be possible. You cannot make cell phones, you cannot make TVs, you cannot make computers, you cannot make microchips without helium, and there is no substitute. So it's a pretty special gas in that respect. When it comes to the supply-demand situation, this is where things start to become unstuck. And to explain the story, a fiction writer could not make this up. So World War I comes along, and the Americans realize that they've got a very large amount of helium. And so the Secretary of Defense approaches the Fed, and they build this thing called the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, which is a really big storage facility in Amarillo in Texas. They separate the helium from their natural gas, and they pump a whole bunch of helium down into the Sandstone deposit 2 kilometers underground. And their intention was to make lighter than aircraft for wartime situations. Anyway, the Wright brothers come along with their planes. Planes get more sophisticated. They drop the helium project. The Manhattan Project comes along in World War II, and they realize that you actually cannot manufacture nuclear weapons. You cannot run nuclear power stations, and basically there's not much that you can do in the nuclear field without helium. And so they start ramping up production and pouring helium into the BLM. The Cold War comes along, and the level of helium being pumped into the BLM starts to reach unprecedented levels. Cold War ends. The Fed wants its money back. The Fed forces the Helium Stewardship Act to come into force, and that forces the government to start selling its critical stockpiles. MRIs are invented, and all of a sudden, the demand for helium outstrips natural supply from new sources, and so the BLM auctions all of its helium off to the private sector. Long story short, 2014 comes along, Bernanke says, get rid of all of the helium now. He wants his money back. 2018, Trump comes out, signs a declaratory order declaring helium as the second most critical element to US national security, for all of the reasons that I've explained. June of 2018 comes along, and the CEO of the BLM stands up and says, whoops, we miscalculated, we've run out of helium, there's nothing left. And all of a sudden, the world has this major crisis, which now the industry refers to as Helium Crisis 3.0. This chart was done in 2017 prior to the announcement of the BLM shutdown. There are no more up-to-date figures than this, unfortunately. It's quite a clandestine little market. But the dark green line at the bottom is the BLM. You can pretty much write off the majority of the dark green line at the bottom from 2021 onwards. It's not there anymore. You've got the Hugoton field, which was at one point the largest source of new helium coming into the world. That turns off in 2022, end of 2022. So the Hugoton field is now gone. Labarge is still there. Labarge is producing. The next big one that is causing an issue is Qatar, which is the gray line in the middle. Qatar was meant to have come online in 2017. So you can see that gray line gets thicker and thicker from 2017 onwards until 2022, where it stabilizes. The issue with that field is that their pipeline blew up, and that pipeline sits across the border in Saudi Arabia, and there are tensions between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're busy suing Samsung Heavy Industries, and they can't actually repair that pipeline. So no one really knows when Qatar is going to come online. So that is also flawed in this diagram. And then there's Russia's Amur project, which is the dark gray line at the top. The dark gray line at the top should have come, it's the second line from the top, it's the green one. So the Amur project, you can see, supplies quite a bit of helium, except that that was meant to come online in 2019 with an initial first stage and then ramping up. As it stands now, the first stage isn't expected to turn on until the end of 2022, 2023. And then from there, it takes a 4 to 5 year ramp up. So best estimates are that Helium 3.0, Helium shortage 3.0 is going to persist for quite a while to come. On the demand side, that black line of 1.5% ignores all of these rocket launches. You may have seen one of Anae's fun facts, but each rocket launch uses the same amount of helium as 2 million party balloons. And China wants to launch something like 120 rockets in the next 18 months or some ridiculous number. And then you've got India, you've got Pakistan, you've got Australia, you've got SpaceX, Amazon has announced its projects. So there are a lot of rockets going up into space, and all of them need helium. Otherwise, it cannot take off. Pricing is extremely opaque, but you can see over here, the orange line is referenced off the left-hand axis, and this is price of helium per 1,000 cubic feet in United States dollars. The orange lines were the prices of the auctions. You can see that they got up to about $115 in 2017, and then there was the announcement of the shutdown of the BLM. They had the auction in August of 2018, the very last auction ever, and that shot up to $286 per 1,000 cubic feet. The black lines represent once you have taken the raw gas out of the ground, you have then refined it, and you have liquefied it down to minus 269 degrees Celsius, or 3 above absolute zero. That's the price that it fetches after you've done all of that to it. It was stable at about $200 per MCF. At the moment, we've heard of prices as much as $300 to $350 per MCF at refinery level. Once you sell it at a refinery, it then goes off and you transfer it into dewars, and you sell it in small lots, and that's the green line referenced off the right-hand axis. Those were prices in 2017. There were prices of about $800 per MCF. Now we're aware that there are some governments in the East that are paying about $1,300 US per MCF for smaller volumes. These are global helium resources. And to put our latest find, our announcement the day before yesterday, into context, that is us at the very end compared to countries and continents. That just puts things in perspective. What's more interesting is if you look at the little red dots and you compare those to the concentrations on the right-hand side. So Qatar obviously has the world's largest resources and reserves. They're sitting at about 356. But their concentration is 0.04%. The United States are the absolute rock stars in helium concentrations. They're at 0.35% concentration across the country. Our average is 3.4%. Our last well was 12%. These are unprecedented by global standards. It makes it the world's richest. At 3.4%, it's the world's richest helium source in terms of concentration. 12% is just a ridiculous number. It really is a ridiculous number. But why the concentration is so important is it talks to the recoverability. If you're going to recover helium that only represents 0.04% of your gas, you need to find a use for the other 99.96% of the gas. Otherwise, you can't get it out of the ground and you can't refine it because it's just too expensive. And it would also be a climate disaster if you're burning the rest of the gas for nothing. So you really have to find a way to commercialize the rest of the gas. And that's why the world has so little helium available. It's not that we don't have the reserves and the resources. It's that the concentrations are so low that the world can't absorb enough LNG in order to make it viable to take the helium out the ground. And this is where we have a double whammy. The first is that our concentrations are very high, so we're taking out relatively little LNG in order to sell the helium. But the second is that South Africa is in the midst of an enormous energy crisis. And so the demand for LNG in South Africa is huge. And so we actually have a massive benefit from the LNG side as well. I'm going to skip through all of this. You can see all of this. Basically, we've got four main key pillars. Power generation is something that we're mulling over. We're noodling this for the second phase, which we're hoping to be able to bring online in 2023, 2024. But right now, power isn't a key focus for us. We're focused on the methane side. We're focused on industrial users. So as a substitute for LPG, it's cleaner, it's cheaper, it's better for the environment. And liquid fuel substitution in trucks. So I'll touch on this. I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail. And then obviously I've spoken a lot about the helium market. So phase one comes online in 2021. We're hoping around September time. We've got 12 wells already drilled. We're drilling a few more. We will be bringing online a baby little LNG plant, a really small little LNG plant that'll do 50 tons per day. And then we're hoping to be able to scale that up to a medium-sized plant of 300 tons per day in 2023. Our helium starts off with a pilot project of 350 kilograms per day for phase one. Phase two, we're hoping to be able to get up to 10,000 kilograms per day of helium. To put that in context, that would be about 12 to 15% of the entire global supply of helium in one project. That would make it arguably, if not the biggest single helium project, probably the second biggest helium project on the planet. This is our hope. This is where we want to get to. It's not to say that it's going to happen. We need to wait for the results from our reservoir engineers. We'll go up to 8 delivery trucks. Those will be delivering LNG every day to the various points. And our intention is to have filling stations for trucks to run on LNG in Cape Town, Joburg, Harrismith, Bloem, PE, Durban. We'll start on the low case of about 360 trucks per day, ramping up to 3,300 trucks that we'll be supplying with LNG. So natural gas instead of diesel, and there's a very strong business case for this. Firstly, we sell natural gas at a minimum of a 25% discount to diesel. So from a logistics truck, from a trucking perspective, if you look at a typical trucking company's income statement, it'll generate 100 units of revenue. Those 100 units of revenue, it spends between 55 and 60 units of revenue just on diesel alone. That's how much these logistics companies spend on diesel. Then of that, you take off another, call it 15 Rand towards the ownership of the truck. That's the repayments plus wear and tear and maintenance and driver's insurance. You take off 20 Rand to the overhead, and all of a sudden your 100 Rand of revenue ends you up with about 5 Rand of net profit before tax. If you substitute that diesel with LNG, and we've done the tests now, you end up saving up to 28% of your cost on the fuel side. The result is that, let's assume that your cost of diesel was 60 Rand and you, on a net basis, only save 10% after all is said and done. Your 60 drops to 54, your net profit before tax goes from 5 to 11. You've more than doubled your net profit on each single truck by switching from diesel to LNG. Plus, you drop your carbon footprint, your greenhouse gas emissions drop by a minimum of 25% using the right technology, which is a little bit more expensive, but using the right technology, if you wanted to, you could drop your greenhouse gas emissions in trucks by up to 90% using LNG. So it's an incredibly green fuel. We've obviously announced a tie-up with Total. So just touching on this, we will be distributing LNG through 2 of their filling stations in phase 1. We've earmarked the Heidelberg Petroport on the way down to Durban. So in due course, you will see that Total on the Durban side, in other words, going to Durban, that will change from a red service station to a green service station. They'll completely rebrand it and they'll make it a green Total filling station. We will have an LNG filling point over there. And we will have an LNG filling point in Pinetown just before you get onto the N3. And that'll service our customers on the Johannesburg to Durban route. Then obviously for phase 2, when phase 2 comes online in 2023, 2024, we'll have additional filling stations in Bloem, PE, East London, Cape Town, and then somewhere between Bloemfontein and Cape Town. Phase 2, this is just a little bit of the geology in terms of what we tapped into. You know, we can get into all of this. I'd rather, you know, instead of going into the exploration, this starts to get a little bit more technical. I'd much rather just open up to questions, and if you want, you can get the presentation either from Nastassia or from our website. But yeah, I'm more keen on engaging with everyone now. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, cool. So now we get to the part where we sort of swap seats. And in this case, you'll give me the hosting rights in order to continue. So I think you'll go back to where you click the arrow that says more, and then give me the permission to be the host.
I'm doing that when I clicked on more, it says live on Facebook, live on.
So it's right next to your profile, and then it gives you the option to change host, or you just click on my profile and there's a little blue tab there that says more, and it should give you the ability to make me the host.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry, technically challenged.
We're in the same boat here. So, so far so good. I think everybody really enjoyed that presentation. And what I want to do with this conversation is that, and we'll get to, you know, one of the reasons why you listed on the ASX market. And from, you know, the presentation you've just described and a lot of the information I've had to research in order to understand the space you're in, I almost got the impression that there isn't quite a lot of people who understand the oil and gas exploration market in South Africa, which is why you may not necessarily find a lot of equity research analysts who may understand your company and companies like yourself. So I think this will be the perfect platform for people to ask as many questions. If you have any questions that need clarification, or it's a term that you didn't understand, I'm sure Stefano will be able to clear that up with you. However, Stefano, I mean, I was saying to you in the beginning of the presentation that at this point, you didn't want to take the title of expert. So I'm going to give you title of honorary expert for now. And what I'm trying to understand is, how does someone who has an actuarial science background team up with someone who has a systems engineering background, and the two of you come together and say, we're going to look for a piece of land, and the idea is that we want to supply natural gas as a substitute for diesel mines in the area?
So, again, one day this will make a fabulous book. Whether anyone will read it or not, I'm not sure. But at least the story is fairly unique. So, Nick and I both were doing some consulting for a mutual friend, and along the way we came across this potential gas asset. And at the time, what was crazy about it, the owners of the gas asset was a listed company in Australia called Malopo Energy. They had this thing, but they had never been to South Africa. They spent probably somewhere in the region of about 100 million rand trying to get the production right awarded. They got the production right, but more importantly, they'd just spent $100 million in drilling in the Permian Basin in Texas. That was going to be their big payday. And then a few things happened. The first thing that happened was that their drill bits all came up dry in the US, and that was the only cash that they had. So their company was put into administration. Then at the same time, the gas prices had gone from $14 per MMBTU. MMBTU is a unit that the gas guys use. It had gone from $14 per MMBTU down to about $2 per MMBTU. And that meant that the whole world gas market had just completely collapsed. This was end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And so we had already engaged with them in terms of negotiation for an acquisition of a reasonable stake in this asset, backed by the Otto family. And when all of this had come to fruition, basically the administrators that had taken over the company said to them, listen, dispose at all cost. And I called them up and pointed out to them that they had environmental liabilities in South Africa with regards to the wells that they had drilled. And I think it struck a chord, and it resonated with the curator, and he agreed to sell the asset to us for $1 on the basis that we took over his environmental liabilities. What he should have paid attention to was the fact that the environmental liabilities were only 2.7 million rand, but at the time they had bigger problems with what was going on in the United States. So we walked away with a gas asset for literally $1. Then about a few months into it, the business plan was simple. It had no proven gas reserves, and there was no mention of helium. There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing there. It was just a wing and a prayer. There were 4 holes in the ground, and these 4 holes, we went to see them. It's actually quite disgusting because they attract enormous amounts of flies, and it is gross. It is the grossest thing you can imagine, because flies are attracted to methane. That's how they find their food. So you go out to these wells, and the wells don't actually blow gas if you leave them open. And Rob, our operations manager, comes out with this 2-meter long spike, and he starts hacking inside the well, and all of a sudden all of this fly blood just flows out and just drenched us all in fly blood. I almost honestly vomited on the side of the well over there. But then the gas starts flowing, and what it ended up happening was that these 4 wells, we bought it literally for the purpose of making a little bit of power. That was it. The sellers weren't aware of the helium. What they'd been doing was that they'd been taking the gas samples from these 4 wells, and they'd been putting them into sample bags. You should be putting them in stainless steel canisters. They were putting them in sample bags, and then they were leaving the sample bags in the back of their bakkie for a month before sending them up to Joburg for testing. Now, you buy a kid a helium balloon. The next day it's not floating anymore. After 2 or 3 days, there's nothing left in it. Helium passes through steel. You can't even keep it in a stainless steel container for that long. In a sample bag, it's not going to be there for very long. So whenever they tested their gas, there was no trace of helium. we just discovered by accident because we were trying to get this power deal done. We needed a sample done that morning. So we drove down in the morning, took the gas sample, came back, and it tested with 2% helium in the one well. And that was when everything changed.
Wow. We've got some really interesting questions and we're going to get to them in a bit, but I'm loving the story. And I think context and background creates such a nice, rich story when potential investors or even investors think of a company. And I think they always remember the little bits of information that you share that's interesting. But as I understand the story, when you guys discovered this 2% helium, you called around and nobody took you seriously until the one call that you made, and that was the company called Linde, and they didn't believe you, but they did eventually send down their team to come and confirm that, wait, actually these guys are onto something. When that information came through to you and you are sitting there with your partner, perhaps across from each other in that meeting, what's going on in your head right now?
So I'd probably got to censor exactly what went through my mind. But no, it was crazy because, so exactly as you said, yeah, we didn't know what helium was, yeah, other than the party balloon market. So we started phoning and, we Googled first and Google said, MRIs. So we cold called GE in New York because they're the world's largest manufacturer of MRIs. And as we said, when we got to 2% on the phone, they said, no, not for us. And they hung up. And as you said, it literally, by the time it got to Linde, the only thing that kept Linde on the line was when they said, no, it's not 2%. It's your equipment that's faulty when you're measuring it. And we said, no, it was a Linde laboratory that told us the 2%. That was why they came back and did the tests. When we realized that it wasn't because the concentration was so low, but because the concentration was so high, that was when we called up, the customer that was going to be buying the power from us. And we said, listen, you're not getting a power project. Sorry for that. And we negotiated and signed up the helium offtake agreement with Linde. We really then realized that we needed to do a lot more work on the exploration, and that it was the little dog that caught the bus, and now it's got to quickly figure out what it's going to do with this bus because it was a lot bigger than we ever thought.
Right. So I'm going to get to some of the questions, and I'm sure as you continue to answer, it will prompt the other participants, to ask their questions as well. The first one says, does Renergen not have an employee share scheme? And if not, do you intend to get buy-in?
We do have an employee incentive scheme. It was approved 2 years ago. And yes, every single year there are share awards. Details of that are contained within the annual report.
All right. And the next one says, can you give us a timeline for revenue and production ramp up going forward?
Yes. So we've been talking about the plant at this stage. The anticipation is that the plant goes live in September of 2021. So if you go onto our website, we've really stuck our necks out and we've given a milestone, a calendar of milestones that need to be achieved. And this just comes down to accountability. Management needs to be accountable to its shareholders, and we've stuck it out there, and for better or for worse, we're going to live or die by those milestones. The milestones show that the plant is meant to turn on in July of 2021. However, those milestones were created before COVID. Although we have not yet been explicitly given a force majeure notice, we are not naive enough to think that the logistics and the supply chain and the construction of our equipment isn't going to be impacted. So we're being cautious and we're telling everyone September. Maybe we get lucky. Maybe it still turns on in July. But for now, based on our best guesses, we're anticipating a September turn on with the information that we have. So revenue starts in September 2021.
Okay. And the other question says, what is the future of helium, and does Renergen intend to get into other chemicals like uranium as alternatives to the current energy system?
No, you know what? We don't want to confuse shareholders. We're a helium company. and we will stick to our knitting. We've developed and amassed a very impressive knowledge base on helium as an element. We know where to find it. We know how to get it out. We know how to commercialize it, and we're going to stick to our knitting on the helium and on natural gas as the byproduct. And I say that tongue in cheek, but it's a very, very important statement to make. You're generally, if you're every company in the world other than Renergen, you are a natural gas company and helium is your byproduct. But when your concentrations are as high as this, you are a helium company and natural gas is your byproduct.
Right. The next question reads, I understand the challenge in the helium market is storage and transportation of it once it's extracted due to its volatility. With that in mind and noting South Africa's distance to key buyer markets, what plans do you have in place to mitigate this?
It's a very good question, very well researched. And as much as you would think that we are far away from the rest of the world, ironically, it is one of our biggest competitive advantages. So yes, you're right. Moving helium is a Herculean effort. Because you have a liquid at minus 269 degrees Celsius, it's kept first in a vacuum jacket and then outside the vacuum jacket, a blanket of liquid nitrogen. But the liquid nitrogen is minus 195 degrees Celsius. So that would be the equivalent of you putting your hand almost in a pot of boiling water. That's what you're doing to the helium. And that's the temperature differential between helium and liquid nitrogen. So it is very cold. Moving it, you've got 45 days to get it to its destination. Now, unfortunately for the planet, the majority of the world's helium reserves are in exceedingly difficult locations. I'll give you an example. Qatar's helium gets to Shanghai on day 44 if absolutely everything goes exactly according to plan, which it doesn't. Most of the world's helium, a lot of the trailers end up being vented at some point, and every time that you vent, it costs you about $50,000. So it's something that you try to avoid. South Africa, by contrast, the whole reason that the Dutch set up a trading colony in Cape Town was because from a shipping perspective, it's the only country in the world that can reach all four corners of the globe in a very short space of time. We can reach China in 29 days. We can reach Japan in about 33, 34. We can reach Europe in 11. We can reach America in about 14, and we can reach 17, and we can reach South America in 14. There is no other helium project on the planet that can boast the ability to reach all four corners of the planet with time to spare before you have to start venting payload. And that's important because every single day that that container sits on a ship, 1% of the original volume in it converts from liquid to gas. The liquid is valuable, the gas is a lot less valuable. So if you take a container with 100 units of it and it arrives in the other side on day 44, then 56% will be liquid, 44% will be gas, and that 44% that the customer's just received is going to be much less valuable because they have to sell it to the welding market or to the breathing market. And they've only got 56% of it left in high value liquid. If, however, you get your helium from South Africa and you get it in 30 days, then 70% of your liquid is recoverable. And that makes our helium much more valuable than other people's helium because we can get it there faster.
Okay, so the next question says, on the LNG side, if your strategy is to focus on industrial users, how are you going to create the linkage into existing pipelines and supply chain?
So definitely not into pipelines. Pipelines carry methane. Our LNG will go in trailers in cryogenic format, so minus 162 Celsius. We deliver the trailers to industrial plants. And if they were running LPG before, you can literally just plug and play LNG in and well, you've got to gasify it first, but that's not difficult. And then you gasify it and you can put it through the exact same infrastructure that LPG was using. Minor modifications, but it's not expensive or complicated. So the plug and play into existing LPG infrastructure is exceedingly easy. When it comes to when it comes to our main focus, though, I'd correct you and say that our main focus is actually transport and the trucks. And then the secondary focus is the industrial users that are currently using LPG.
Okay, and the next question says, what are the reasons for the opportunity not being reflected in your share price as yet? What are the reservations of analysts or possibly of this not materializing in the way you anticipate?
So I would say what you touched on earlier is very salient. Right now, we're the only oil and gas stock in South Africa. Sasol is a diversified chemicals company, so they wouldn't be evaluated on metrics. There's Ephora Energy, but that's a deep sea oil and gas play in Nigeria. It's not a South African stock. So we're literally the only oil and gas play in South Africa, and as a result of that, we've got no equity research. We're a small caps in South Africa are generally quite unloved, and so it's going to be difficult to try and make the investment case in South Africa as to what it is that we have, which is what prompted the listing in Australia. Since the listing in Australia, the share price has almost increased 80 to 90%. So it's done particularly well, at least at pre-COVID. It's done particularly well on that side. There's certainly more of an understanding on that side, and we're starting to gain momentum on the Australian side. And obviously the thinking and the rationale is that where the JSE has a total of 450 to 470 companies listed on it, the ASX has something like 450 oil and gas explorers listed on that side alone. So we're in good company on that side, and there's more than enough equity research on that side. And obviously the law of no arbitrage will ensure that there's a closeout between the two share prices. But yeah, it was a necessary move for us to list on the other side in order to create that visibility, and to have the share price readjust when we start to come out with our updated numbers.
Okay. The next question says, please give us a forecast relating to your operating profit.
I may not give forecasts under both the JSE and ASX rules.
All right, and this one was, I think actually it relates to the same question, so we're going to give that a miss as well. The next one says...
What I can do is that I can say, look at the MST Access equity research report on us, and look at the Edison investment research piece on us. I would say to listeners that the financial models and their forecasts that they've put together in that equity research is very impressive. It's quite close. It's quite close to our model.
Okay. Some of the comments from users, rather from the listeners, say that your story is really good. There's a movie script waiting to be written. So that's a compliment for you and your team.
It's just a question of who's going to play me.
That is the thing, hey?
Hopefully it's not Danny DeVito.
Well, I'm sure they'll give you an option to decide who can play you. This one comes from Keegan, and he wants to know, who are the major engineering contractors involved in building these plants, and what will they be doing?
So we, on the pipeline, we've opted for EPCM, which is a young startup firm. It's the ex-engineers from Worley Parsons who broke away. They designed the Romco Sasol line. So we're in good hands over there. On the liquefier side, for phase 1, the plant is designed by a company called Western Cryogenic. It's a Chinese company owned by an American citizen who was the head of cryogenics for NASA before becoming America's chief scientist at the Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York, and had all of the scientists on the government payroll reporting into him, including 14 Nobel laureates. He moved to China, set up a manufacturing arm over there, manufacturing cryogenics, specializing in ultra-low-end cryogenics. And he is the world's foremost expert on cryogenics. It's a very impressive individual. Every rocket that goes into space uses his design. It's quite impressive.
Wow. The next question says, are the reserves quoted earlier externally audited?
Yes, they've got to. Yeah, absolutely. The rules around that are very formidable. So we have to adhere to the American standards, the Australian standards, and the South African standards. So that's API, that's SAMOG, that's PRMS. Those are all the fancy acronyms. But yes, everything is absolutely externally audited. There are very strict criteria in terms of how the reserves and the resources are calculated. And then they go through peer review, and then they go to the exchanges, and the exchanges have their own readers panel that then interrogate the data and the analysis before you're allowed to publish anything. So it is a very formidable task if you're going to get your reserves and your resources quoted.
Okay, the next question reads, are there any other minerals or metals in the area besides the gaseous deposits? And is there a chance to establish a new mining complex in South Africa?
South Africa is blessed with the most ridiculous array of minerals, and we've been cursed with the worst set of legislation. I'll leave it there.
Okay. And then let's have a look. There was a question which reads, relates to funding. So it says, when will you need to raise more funding, and what are the mechanisms you're exploring, i.e. further share issuances?
So at this point, we're obviously busy evaluating phase 2. Phase 1 is fully funded. Phase 2, we're a lot of it relies on Sproul's update as to what our reserves and resources are. There's still a few more inputs that we need to obtain in order to give them to be able to get the updated reserves and resources. So I'll be able to give more clarity on what's happening probably around September in terms of the phase 2. But yeah, for now, yes, we will anticipate that we'll need more capital. How much is debt? How much is equity? We're not quite sure yet. But it'll be for a completely new project. It's not going to be on the back of what we have at the moment. It's going to be on the back of a much bigger project.
Right. Stefano, I read the open letter that you wrote to the Eskom CEO. And we both know that, I think everybody else listening here, that South Africa finds itself in an energy crisis. And there's not a lot you can do if your energy supply is not stable. In a world that is perfect, or in a world that functions the way we would like it to function, what opportunities would you see in the energy space right now in order for us to deal with our energy problem?
Small wins. There's no one silver bullet. It's improvements in efficiency. So we've got to clean up the distribution network, which is inefficient and losing a lot of energy into the atmosphere. It's improving our generation capacity, bringing online more renewables. The idea that I'd put in that open letter, I think that would be a quick win, and that would bring a lot more renewables online. It would also clean up the carbon footprint. But if you start to go more towards an open source architecture, we will solve our problems very, very quickly, because the private sector will be able to get involved. And it's very much, the analogy is very much like if you think about the original IBM machines. So in the 50s and 60s, you had this mainframe, you had this giant mainframe network, and then you'd go to a terminal if you had any computing problems. You'd type in your code at the terminal, that code would be transmitted to the mainframe. That mainframe would then do the calculations and then send back the data. And that's kind of what the electricity network is at the moment. You've got the generator, or Eskom, and they're sending out the power via the distribution network. And then you had the advent of the personal computer. Everyone had their own computing power on their desktop, and you didn't need the mainframe, and so the mainframes disappeared. And I think more and more you're going to start to see people self-generate through power, as batteries, through solar. As batteries become cheaper, you'll be able to go completely off grid in quite an economic way. Reticulating gas and having gas powered generators at your home, that's another option. There's all sorts of different things that we can do as an economy, but obviously that requires the legislation and the regulation to to follow suit, which it isn't at the moment. I mean, you look at Germany. Germany had a massive electrification drive using solar, and now they're a net exporter of clean energy. And that's because they deregulated. It allowed you to put solar panels on your roof. They paid you for it. And incidentally, they managed to get all of this generation capacity off balance sheet. It wasn't even their main utility. By getting the average man in the street to put solar panels on his or her roof meant that they were using their personal balance sheets to create the generation capacity. And that's the mindset that we need to overcome, is this idea of central state ownership of absolutely everything. That's the biggest problem.
Before I let you go, what's next for Renergen right now?
Right now, we're about to start drilling. We're busy making preparations. So the next well is really going to prove our concept of incline drilling into the faults and fissures. I didn't really touch too much on that today, but basically this well that we're going to start drilling now is quite key to our analysis. We're working with Sproul to update our reserves and resources. As I said, we're hoping to bring that up in September. And then that'll give a lot of clarity as to the timing and the size of the phase 2 project, which as I said, we're hoping for 2023. The other thing that I'd say is that for any of the listeners, feel free to sign up to our LNG and logistics webinar, which is going to be hosted on the 14th of July. That'll give you a very good idea of what's happening globally with regards to the use of LNG in vehicles.
All right, Stefano, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure people really enjoyed this. And because we want to keep these conversations on an ongoing basis, I'm sure we will schedule another webinar. And just to give a teaser, in the next webinar, because people love the stories that you tell and they love the stories about how your company came to be what it is right now, we can start off the discussion and you can tell the listeners about that 1968 Ferrari that you almost bought, but you didn't buy, and why you regret it. I think that will make a very interesting story to tell.
That you do your research very well.
Thank you so much to everyone who joined in on the discussion. It was really informative, and I certainly learned lots of new things. We will have this webinar uploaded for those of you who've missed certain aspects of it, and we will try and get the presentation through to you. Thank you once again for listening to the investment case for Renergen. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.